Chapter 18. Mateo tried not to let his eyes cross. Iker was a polite young man, but dull as a rusty blade and ambitious as mud. While Mateo politely answered questions and attempted to find something they had in common, his mind ran to Vittoria. Was she safe? Did she feel lonely? Had anyone been rude to her? Bernat tried to blend into the crowd not far away, looking somehow out of place despite his elegant attire. Josca would be somewhere on the grounds by now. Mateo managed to catch Bernat's eye in silent question. Bernat tilted his head to the right. Vittoria was speaking to a butler near a bookshelf on the other side of the room. Relieved to have eyes on her, he turned half his mind back to Iker, until the air in the room shifted. The effect was subtle. Flutes played, couples danced. Food filled the room with delicious aromas. But he felt the odd change like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Bernat looked at him immediately. Mateo nodded to the balcony, the only true weakness in a place like this, open like an invitation, and clapped a hand on Iker's shoulder. "Sorry, Jonah. Must find my betrothed." A scream interrupted the night. An awful squawk filled the air as a flutist missed their note. Then another woman screamed from somewhere outside. Mateo was halfway across the ballroom when the first rebel made it in. Bernat swung around his right flank, headed toward Vittoria. Panicked witches bolted to the other edge of the ballroom, away from the balcony. By the time he waded through the disarray, Vittoria had moved. "Vittoria," he called. He towered over most witches, but all he could see was chaos. Rebels poured into the ballroom, ringing the sides. They held no weapons, producing terror by their presence alone. Likely snaking around the edges was an attempt to force all the landowners into the interior of the room. Overhead, chandeliers threw bright prisms of light on the checkered tile floor, reflecting off the expensive gems. Landowners screamed. Men shoved women behind them. A few girls hid behind chairs and sobbed. Mateo grabbed a chair and stepped on it while witches streamed past. In the melee, he caught a glimpse of a magnolia flower. Seconds later, he stood next to Vittoria. She clutched a heavy candlestick like her metal pipe and kept her back to the wall. Her eyes watched the rebels as they stationed themselves in front of exits before anyone could escape. "You're well?" he asked, breathless. "Fine," she said without fear. "The rebels, I presume?" He nodded and pulled her close. The butler stepped forward. Zaldar. Mateo recognized him from his time here as a young boy. "Majesty," he said to Mateo, one hand on his heart, "allow me to escort you and the lady out of here to safety." Mateo studied him. The title of Majesty and Lady from a butler in the castle? He wasn't sure what it meant, but it was unexpected. "Thank you," he said cautiously, "but I will stay. Do you know which rebels are infiltrating?" Zaldar hesitated. "Who is it?" Mateo said more sharply. "The rebels from Nechi Coven, Majesty. At least that's what rumors say." The man knew which coven these rebels were from, had kept Vittoria along the far edge of the room, and also addressed him as Majesty? It made no sense. Zaldar's affiliations were mixed. But Mateo set that aside to think about later. The rebels were steps away. When 3 rebels advanced toward him, a nearby landowner grabbed Zaldar, put a knife to his neck, and shouted, "Stay back!" 3 rebels immediately stopped. Vittoria sucked in a sharp breath of surprise. The landowner's gaze darted from Mateo to the rebels. "Well?" he shouted at Mateo. "Aren't you going to stop them?" Mateo stared hard at him. "Only if they attempt to harm someone. At this moment, Jonah, only you have done that." This isn't acceptable," the landowner cried. "I agree," he said calmly. "Let us hear out their reasoning." One of the rebels snarled, while another, the smallest, seemed to focus on Vittoria. The screams of the landowner women had localized to the middle of the ballroom now, where they'd been herded like sheep. Vittoria stepped forward. "Drop your knife," she demanded to the landowner holding Zaldar, "or we will allow the rebel witches to overtake you." "You're with them," the landowner cried. "Not yet," she muttered. Mateo used a spell to freeze the knife in the landowner's hand. It crackled with the sudden chill, and the man screamed as it burned his palm with a frigid kiss. The knife toppled to the ground. The landowner shoved Zaldar away. "Lady," Zaldar said with a hand held out to Vittoria, "please, allow me to take you to safety." The landowner darted off. All around the ballroom, landowners had gone on the attack, fighting back. Incantations, curses, shields, lights of different colors and sizes came from thrown blighters, glowing balls of magical power with various effects. A tangle of retreating rebels nearly knocked Zaldar over in their haste to get to the food on the other side of the room. Mateo grabbed Zaldar's shoulder and held him upright. "Get back," he said to Vittoria. The last thing he needed was her getting injured. She ignored him, gaze trained on the battle in the center of the room. He watched, stunned by the back and forth between landowners and rebels. For the most part, the rebels didn't seem fazed by the magic, though they weren't using any obvious magic themselves. Did they also have magic? Why were they here? Magic had been outlawed for workers for almost 20 years. The younger generation supposedly had no skill, but the older generation did. It would have been easy enough for them to teach it underground, in the catacombs where Hode dared not send his magic-seeking guardians. One good fight down there, and the whole leaky catacombs could collapse, taking the city of Nechi with it. But what were the rebels doing here anyway? Now that all the landowners had been pushed to the center of the room, some rebels were raiding the food tables. Others plucked crystals off the chandeliers. The rest engaged with the fighting landowner men. Largely, they did almost nothing but steal, except for a rebel on the far side of the room who slipped through a secret door. Another spoke to a butler, hidden in curtains. Did Mateo see shadows climbing the walls outside through the windows? Odd. 5 rebels headed toward him, drawing his attention back. He, Zaldar, and Vittoria were the only non-rebels on the edge of the room. Even Romeo stood in the ring of landowners, shouting orders. The incoming rebels' faces were hidden in the deep hoods of their dark cloaks. Their ratty boots thudded as they marched with stern determination. Vittoria sidestepped Mateo, putting herself directly in their path. Before he could reach out to pull her back, all 5 witches stopped. Mateo moved behind her, a warning on his face. But the 5 witches seemed, again, to be staring at Vittoria. Zaldar stood at her side, trembling. The knife had nicked his skin, and blood smeared his wrinkled neck. "What do you want?" Vittoria asked. 2 of them fell to their knees in front of her. "La Principessa," one of them murmured. "Why are you here?" "Did you know?" asked another, guilt in their voice. His stomach twisted. La Principessa? By the Giver is not here. This was not the time or the place for her to have this revelation. Mateo shifted to stand in front of her, but Vittoria put a hand out to stop him. "Wait." "La Principessa," whispered a rebel who stepped forward, female by her quiet voice and slender shoulders. She seemed more confused than shocked. "Is it really? Are you—" Vittoria's face turned white. "Son." The witch cut her off. "Are you really La Principessa?" Vittoria reached out a hand to the magnolia flower in her hair. If the rush of understanding that filled her expression meant anything, Mateo's entire hand had just been revealed to her. To her credit, she didn't look at him, didn't scream. Instead, she just stood there in pale shock. Another rebel advanced, nearly shoving the first to her knees. "Lies," he snarled. "You're no more La Principessa than I am La Turere. On your knees, landowner wife." "Not while I live," Mateo murmured silkily, stepping in front of her. "Would you like to challenge me?" The rebel stumbled back a step, stuttering. An unusual quiet had fallen on the room, and Mateo felt the weight of many stares. He could not be seen as in league with the rebels, nor would he give the rebels a reason to hate him more if it could be avoided. An impossible task. Half the rebels now ringed the throng, fighting off curses, hexes, and other magic from the landowners. The rebels didn't reciprocate with blatant magic, but Mateo saw the ripples of shields every now and then. Interesting. The rest of the rebels stared at Vittoria instead of fighting. Even the landowners had slowed their blighters and were looking at her now. Whatever the Nechi rebels' plan, it had just begun to crumble thanks to Vittoria's distracting presence. Seeming to understand this, Vittoria brushed past Mateo and strode into the fighting crowd before he could stop her. Her lips moved over and over again. "Stop! Stop now!" But the cacophony prevented her from being heard. Mateo followed her, casting a spell to amplify her voice. "Stop!" Her shouted command echoed through the ballroom. For a breath, the chaos calmed. Nearby rebels dropped to their knees in a circle around her. The landowners hesitated, magic sparking in the air, no doubt wondering what had just happened. Mateo moved as close to her as he dared without blocking her. Vittoria slowly turned, comprehending the whispers of "La Principessa" from the rebels on their knees at her feet. Her expression paled further. Across the room, Romeo stared at Mateo with dark, glittering eyes. Mateo met his stare without a flicker. Did Romeo see it now? Did Romeo comprehend what Vittoria just barely understood herself? He must, because rage pulsed in his throat. Mateo fought off a smile, but not too hard. His lips curled up slightly as he looked at his brother. Oh, yes. This was a plan that not even Romeo could have anticipated. And that was why Romeo looked ready to kill. Romeo's nostrils flared as he shoved his way through the crowd. "That's enough," Romeo shouted as he stepped forward. "Seize every single one of them. They will all taste death tonight." The rebels disappeared at once. Their sudden absence sent a gasp through the room. Only 2 stragglers remained, held by a burly landowner and unable to transport. They landed a pair of well-aimed punches, and the landowner fell unconscious as the 2 rebels vanished. Mateo darted forward to grab Vittoria. His hand closed on her arm just as he finished muttering the transportation spell. Darkness fell as Romeo advanced, a knife gripped in his white knuckles. But Mateo was already whisking Vittoria far away.